fruitful and multiply, it's a famous commandment. Some say that it's a statement, but it's clear. The Torah asks us to follow God's commandment. The creation of the world is in order to the world to be populated with people. The question is that applied to just having one child, two children, boys, girls? What exactly the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply? Does that mean that someone who's not married violated Torah laws? Does that mean that there are requirements to have more girls or more boys? What exactly the Torah meant? So this is part of our discussion. We are on page 61, the Mishnah. Here is the Mishnah dealing with Eiras et almana v'nitmana lekohen gadol. This is a fellow, a regular, mundane Kohen idiot, that he engaged with a widow, which is okay for a regular Kohen. But after that happened, all of a sudden, they appointed him to be Kohen Gadol. So the question is, can he go ahead and complete the act of betrothal by marry her? Or since the Torah prohibited Kohen Gadol to marry a widow, he can no longer have relationship with her. So the Mishnah said, Yichnos, he allows to go ahead and complete the process of marriage. Why? The simple explanation is because he did it beheter, which means he did it with without knowing that he is going to be a Kohen Gadol. So the intent was pure. The event, the incident happened at the time that it was okay biblically and halachically. So therefore, the result does not require him to separate from her. Umaaseh Yoshua ben Gamla. Here is a very interesting story about a fellow שקידש מרתה בת בר ביתוס. He betrothed with a widow. Soon you see it's a very wealthy widow by the name of Marta bat bar ביתוס. ומינו המלך להיות כהן גדול, and the king appointed him to be Kohen Gadol. וכנסה, and then he married her while he was Kohen Gadol. So you see here that Kohen Gadol, who engaged a widow as a Kohen idiot, and it's okay. But we have to remember that this is not just a name. Soon you see it's a name involved with special event, and soon you see the issue with that event. You see something also the Mishnah said in the opposite, in the reverse order. שומרת יבם שנפלה לפני כהן ידות. So you have a Reuven and Shimon, and it's a Kohanim family, and Reuven married Tamar, and Reuven passed away. So Tamar is in a waiting time for Shimon, who is a regular Kohen, to do what? To do ייבום, to act in a levirate to her. ונתמנה להיות כהן גדול. Now what happened is, Shimon is about to either do ייבום or וחליצה with Tamar, and then they appointed him as a Kohen Gadol. So here Tamar has no children, and the question is, Kohen Gadol in general, biblically speaking, prohibited to marry a widow. So the Mishnah said the other way around, אף על פי שעשה בה מאמר, even he did ma'amar, such as diamond, money, a star, etc., letter. So it's a regular Kohen idiot, which is, by the rabbinic view, the Rabbanan, it's kim'at kemo bi'ah, it's almost like act of bi'ah, yet, harei ze lo yichnos. You ask yourself, you have here a rusin, act of betrothed, you have kinus. So, the moment he was appointed as Kohen Gadol, he needs to give her a get, and he needs to release her from the zikat ייבום. So here you see the other way. תנו רבנן. So תנו רבנן מניין שאם אירס את האלמנה ונתמנה לכהן גדול שיכנוס. How do you know if a regular Kohen engaged with a widow and before he appointed as a high priest he can continue on and marry her? Talmud lomar yikach isha. The Torah said in Leviticus 21 verse 14 that he should take a betula, but they use the word yikach isha, and you ask yourself, why the Torah need to say the word isha? It's obvious when you say that he can only marry betula. Obviously, it's isha, right? So it means the rabbis derive from that the word isha teaches us that he can take a widow if it happens in the early stage and he gullibly, without knowing that there is a plan to appoint him as a Kohen Gadol, engage, betrothed with her. So they said, Yachesh omeret yavam nami. So if that's the case, why the Mishnah instructed us the other way around when it's come to a Levirate marriage? When this Tamar, you remember her? She was in a state of waiting. Why with her, even he did Ma'amar, Shimon, right? You still say that they cannot get married. So they said, no, you have to look carefully at the text and examine it. The Torah used the word Isha, velo Yevama. So, since the Torah used the term Isha, it has to be a solely Isha, wife, in that manner, and not under category Yevama, because the Torah, when it's come to Yevama, the Torah used the word Yevama. Meaning Isha, it's someone that it's have bond between the two. So then the Mishnah said, Maaseh Yoshua, remember, Yoshua ben Gamla, שקידש את מרתה בר ביתוס ומינהו המלך להיות כהן גדול. So here you have a story of almana, of a widow. So the Gemara said, minahu ein, nitmana lo. So I explained in my book on Rashi. Rashi said here, כלומר המלך מינו, אבל אחיו הכהנים וסנהדרין לא מינו. So it reminds me in politics. Sometimes, that's what Rashi wants to medayek. Sometimes there are people who are appointed by others. Think about, let's say, ambassador. How the president appointed people to be ambassador. It's not the education, right? Let's face it, right? It's not the guy that he or she have a degree in political science necessarily. Okay. It's usually someone who give money to a campaign, early stage, and is giving back favors. I'm right or I'm wrong? In every country, right? The compensation is that they're making someone ambassador, no? Or something like that, in that manner, right? You go on a campaign, they don't donate money to you, they donate to the campaign, and later on you compensate the cousin or the relative or the person himself, you appoint them, right? So they said, here, Rashi was disturbed a little bit in the language here. So minau in, nitmana lo. What did the Mishnah said here? We talk about a regular Kohen, engaged with the widow, can go ahead and marry her if he appointed the Kohen Gadol. Fine. So why need to give us this example, right? And not just that, Rashi examined, I think that's the reason we use klomar, he said, Minau, that meaning the kings appointed him. How come he appointed him, right? So they said, and not by the brothers and the Sanhedrin. Usually it was yes, it was a committee. Do you guys know? It was a committee. Committee, yes, it's a two different type. It was either Kohanim or the Sanhedrin. Basically, it was a group of the Bet Din, group of Kohanim, that it's called Moreh Hora'ah Kol Sha'ah. They used to answer halachic questions. Remember, it's a huge organization. People come with the offering, they do all kind of works, etc. So it was a team of Bet Din, that is a Torah scholar, that they answered Bet Din that made by the Kohanim, that answer questions. So they sat in Ezras Nashim, and it was a two different form of Kohanim. One is the Ezras Nashim that was 23. That was one form of Bet Din. It was also another place, Sanhedrin Gdolah, of 71 people, 71 judges. So it's a question, it's not clear by the Rambam if they sat together or they sat separate, but the key here for sure, that was the people who appointed the high priest. Here, the Mishnah said, no, the king appointed him, right? So, it's not the Bet Din that decided who is the Kohen. Now, just remember that, remember we studied it in the Tractate Yevamot. In Tractate Yevamot, they tells us it was different between the first and the second temple. The first temple, it's a question how many. Some said, but even you go to the maximum, you said it was 18 high priests by highest valuation. So you are speaking about Kuru'ei Shem, they said in Parshat Korach, which means that they selected people, they served for many years, 25 years and more. So it's not just a regular Kohanim. Here you see a story about this fellow, the king, who appointed him. So they said, Amar Rav Yosef Katir Kachazina Hacha, the Amar Rav Asi Tarkevad Dinarei Ailalei Marta Barbaisios Lianai Amelech Ademokil El Yoshua Ben Gavra Bechan Rav Revei. How do you like that? What did they say here? That he married, there's a few ways, but in general he married this very influential, rich lady, Marta Barbaitos. And what happened? She gave the king, Yanai Melech, the king Yanai, a lot of money. And as a result, he appointed her new husband of this widow to be what?
Kohen Gadol.
Yeah.
So, few points. First of all, according to the Tosfot, this is not the Yanai Melech that we know in Kiddushin, page 66. He says, Lav haynu Yanai Kohen Gadol, de'im ken lo haya moshiv acher bimkomo. But that's one way. The Tosfot said it can be the Yanai Melech. It's not the famous one. Tosfot Yeshenim said, he asked a question, Yoshua ben Gamla, the way we read about him, was a tzaddik, he was a righteous man. Mm-hmm. They said that he was the one, it's like a Meir Shapiro, is one who created the schools, etc., etc. And if you remember, we studied it in Yuma, page 18, we studied it in Tractate Baba Batra, page 21. So he said here, שתיקן כמה תקנות שאותו צדיק היה. He said it's a different Yoshua ben Gamba, it's not the same one. אלא אחר הוא זה. That's תוספות ישנים. So we should know that the Tosfot in Bava Batra disputed it, Bava Batra 21, and he said that it is true that he created Melamdei Tinokot, schools, etc., but it was others who are more either scholar or righteous or both than him. So the Ritva over there in Bava Batra said that, you know what happened to him? And again, this is a big question if it is Yoshua ben Gamla or someone else by that name. He says no. After they appointed him, he, as a result of appointed him, the Sfat Emet said, so they said that Gadlehu said one of the things that we are commended is if someone appointed as the Kohen Gadol, we need to raise him high. So how you raise him? They said Mishel Echav. How you do it? So the Sfat Emet said Gidlo Bechochma. They taught him a lot of things. So it means he became the great scholar as a result of being Kohen Gadol, that he became righteous and scholar by having others teaching him. Anyway, you see here a few different avenues how to understand this Mishnah. Next one. Kohen Gadol Shemet Achiv. You have here a high priest whose brother died without children. So here the widow is now looking for ייבום, right? חולץ ולא בימיהם. He performed וחליצה and he does not perform a levirate marriage, as he may not marry a widow. That's what we study. So the Tosfot tells us that even the previous Mishnah teaches that Kohen Gadol cannot do ייבום, but here, the reason we mentioned that here, Tosfot said something very thoughtful. He said, you know what happened here? They're standing before the king, and part of the וחליצה is what? She's spitting, right? And that's very inappropriate at the front of the king. So therefore, he cannot do that. That's based on the Sanhedrin, page 18. Kapasik vetani, the Gemara said, the Mishnah teaches the halacha, and they explain it in a categorical way, indicating that that Kohen Gadol cannot do ייבום with a widow, לא שנה מן הנישואין ולא שנה מן האירוסין, which means regardless if the brother of the Kohen Gadol live with her together in a manner of husband and wife, or if he only engaged with her, the Mishnah prohibited the Kohen Gadol to do ייבום. בשלמה מן הנישואין עשה ולא תעשה. If it's come to a issue after she already married to his brother. So here you have negative commandment. Leviticus 21 verse 14, the Torah said, Almana lo yikach. And the other one is, Vehu isha bivtulea yikach. So you see here a clear commandment, positive and negative, and the principle is, Ve'ein aseh doche lo ta'aseh ve'aseh. We learn on page 4 that if you have a positive commandment imposed upon you, and you cannot fulfill that positive commandment only by violating, doing something in a negative commandment, so the positive cannot override the negative. So for example, the mitzvah of ייבום that imposed upon the high priest cannot override the mitzvah of positive and negative involved with widow from the stage of the wedding, which means that the Torah said clearly the word betula yikach. Ela, but you have to say that she is still in a status of betula because min ha'erusin, because it's only in the time of betrothal. So that's only a negative commandment of what? Widow to high priest. Yavo aseh ve'idche lo ta'aseh. So you have here a positive commandment that override the negative, which is the marriage between the widow and the Kohen Gadol. So the Gemara responded and said, Gzeira bi'a rishona atu bi'a shniya. The sages come in and put a decree, and they said, because there is decree that prohibiting the first act of cohabitation, so we go for the second one, which means it happens that the first one you said, okay, guess what's going to happen? He is going to come again and have again relation with her. So that's the rabbinic boundaries that put around and said no. If we analyze the text in Deuteronomy 25 verse 5, so the mitzvah of ייבום applies to one time of act of relation between the Yavam and the Yevamah. In that matter, biblically speaking, he acquired her to the status of his wife. So usually, the moment that happened, the prohibition of brother's wife is annulled by that act of cohabitation. But here, it means that the moment they are connected is the issue. Why it's an issue? As we said, because he is the Kohen Gadol. So therefore, he needs to divorce her right away. And the sages, practically speaking, they figured out, guess what happened? They're already together, they already have relation. He is not going to do it. So they put a boundary, the sages, and they said, what? He has to do וחליצה and he will not do ייבום. That's the way Rashi, Tosfot, and others explained to us earlier on page 20b. The next Mishnah said, Kohen Hediot, a common Kohen, lo yisa ailonit. He should not marry Ailonit. Ailonit is a woman that reached the age of 20 and she still doesn't show any manner of adulthood. That's one way, which means her body is still in the very early stage of age, which means like a baby's body, right? Not any manner of adulthood. Or there is another way that she cannot have children, barren woman. That's the Gemara in Ketubot, page 11. So the issue which we're going to discuss further is the issue, the purpose of marriage in Judaism is to have children. And therefore, is the issue here. But the next question Rashi asks, why are you talking specifically about Kohen? How about everyone? One of the Midrashim, by the way, said about Sarah Imenu, our foremother Sarah, that she was Ailonit in a sense. If you read the text, the miracle that happened with her, that at the very advanced age she had a child. Anyway, Ela im ken, yesh lo isha ubanim. Rashi is not hold the word isha, meaning another wife, but or that you already have children, which means it's not an issue of married someone who has no children by itself, but the idea is if this person already fulfilled the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply, then he can go ahead and marry women that will not be able to have children. That's the code said in Even Ezra, the first chapter. They said, רבי יהודה אומר, אף על פי שיש לו אישה ובנים, לא יישא אלונית, שהיא זונה האמורה בתורה. So, one of the women that the Torah prohibited to marry, it's called zona. And later we see the definition, because there's several views. What does that mean? In general, it's Leviticus 27 verse 7. Rabbi Yehuda said, zona, it's someone who cannot have children, because by having relation with her, you cannot have children. Now, the truth is, there's other who said, for example, we know the story of Yoshua bin Nun, the famous student of Moses, the successor of Moshe Rabbeinu. Remember his story? So he married Rachav, and the text scholar in the book of Joshua, Zona. So some say that it's applied to mezonot, which is the sustenance. Anyway, והחכמים אומרים אין זונה אלא גיורת ומשוחררת ושנבעלה בעילת זנות. So Rashi tells us, כגון ישראלית הנבעלת לפסולה. So for example, if they have a cohabitation in a regular, but someone who's disqualified, so that's part of which we call zona michayavei lavin. Tosfot said, בקונטרס ישראלית שנבעלה לפסולה, ואי אפשר לומר כן דמחייבי לוין דתפסה בקידושין לא אהבי זונה. So that's basically based on Rashi in the next part, Samech Aleph Amud Bet. Rashi said it clearly. So anyway, the idea is either because Baalei Agoy or Beheter, he basically changed the status שנבעלה בעילת זנות. אמר לריש גלותא לרב הונא, מהי טעמה? What's the reason that we are prohibited Kohen to marry Ailonit? משום פריה ורבייה, because there is a commandment to be fruitful and multiply. So he said, so the question is, הפריה ורבייה כהנים הוא מפקדי וישראל לא מפקדי? Remember what we asked? So why specifically you tell me that that's applied to Kohanim? How about regular Israel? What's why the mitzvah is for everyone? So why they said Kohen Idiot? Amar lei mishum dekabay lemitnei seifa. You have to look at the last clause of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda tells us, אף על פי שיש לו אישה, even if he has a wife, 61b, ויש לו בנים, לא יישא אילונית. So here you see that he has a children, he has a wife, he has a children, he may not marry a אילונית, someone who cannot have children, שהיא זונה האמורה בתורה. דעה זונה כהנים ודמפקדי וישראל לא מפקדי, which means that it applies to the Kohen only, משום אחי קטני כהן. So this is basically a disputation between Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, they do use it, but it applies to all. אמר רב גאונה, מהי תמה דרבי יהודה? That he defined alonit as zona, dichtiv, this is the prophet Hosea. He said in chapter 4, verse 10, אכלו ולא יסבאו, הזנו ולא יפרוצו. So he said, and they shall eat and not have enough, and they shall commit harlotry and shall not increase. So he expounds the verse as follows: כל ביאה שאין בה פרצה אינה אלא בעילת זנות. So it means, Tosfot explained, that if you have a relation, for example, someone that you are looking forward when she grew up, she will be able to have children, that's different. That's not considering zonah. So, or for example, you can marry an old lady if in an earlier stage of her life she had children. So again, it's not considering zonah, and it's fine to marry. Or according to Yavetz, if you marry someone that is temporarily akara, which means that she's barren, but with a certain treatment she can be healed. So that's different. However, if the idea of marriage, you have the issue of ve'onata lo igra, so the halacha is not according to Rabbi Yehuda, but the Aruch Laner explained on page 20b. He said it's you cannot prove much from here. The whole idea is you can have a great Torah scholar, and you ask yourself, what is he guilty that his great grandparents or somebody from his family did a violation by cohabitation in the manner of violation. But the reality is, they said here, kol bia she'en ba pirza, which means that any type of relation does not have the possibility to increase the population because the woman is incapable of having children. So therefore it's called be'ilad znut. But again, as we said, that's not applied by, if you go by the Tosfot, with someone that potentially in the future she grow up and she can have children, or someone who's already had children in the past, or someone that can be healed and have children. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Kohen lo yisa et haktana. Any Kohen cannot marry a minor. Amar le Rabbi Chiyaz del Rabba, Puk ayen bach, di lo urta ela ravuna minach. So he's going to ask you, Nafak ve'ayen, ba Rabbi Eliezer savar la ki Rabbi Meir, ve'savar la ki Rabbi Yehuda. So, the combination of two, he prohibited Kohen to marry a minor. Savar la ki Rabbi Meir, v'chayesh lemiuta. Rabbi Meir is one of those rabbis that care for every view. He doesn't just go by the majority. You know, usually how it happens, you take a vote, you go by the majority, and goodbye, right? Here is a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Meir. He says, no, if they have minority views, I want to hear them, and as long as it's not consent, they are not go there. So therefore, he concerned about far-fetched, far-away possibility that if this young minor will grow up Ailonit, and then, in a sense, the marriage cannot be fruitful. וסבר לה כרבי יהודה, אמר אילונית זונה היא. So that's basically Isur Lab, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer prohibited Kohen to marry a minor, because if he turns to be Ailonit, then he violated the idea of prohibition of with being with Zona. ורבי מאיר מי סבר לה? והתניא, קטן וקטנה לא חולצין ולא מייבמים. A minor cannot do neither וחליצה nor ייבום דברי רבי מאיר. אמרו לו לרבי מאיר, יפה אמרת שאין חולצים. איש כתיב בפרשה, the Torah said in Deuteronomy 25 verse 7, they use the word איש, לא יחפוץ האיש, ומקשינן אישה לאיש. And we basically compare a woman to a man, and therefore limit חליצה to an adult woman. אלא מהי טעמה אין מייבמים? What's the reason that we don't have ייבום? אמר להם, רב מאיר said, קטן שמא יימצא סריס, קטנה שמא תימצא אילונית. Maybe when they grew up, this little child turned to be an adult that is incapable to have children, or her, she can turn the same manner, incapable to have children by being אילונית. ונמצאו פוגעים בערווה. You remember we said that part of the list in Leviticus 18 is a prohibition against what? Marrying the brother's wife. And the only exception other way around is to perpetuate the soul of the deceased by doing ייבום. But if basically that person is incapable to have children, then you are in violation of Leviticus 18, marry the brother's wife, right? So therefore it's prohibited. ותניא קטנה מתייבמת ואינה חולצת, דברי רבי אליעזר. So it means Rabbi Eliezer disputed Rabbi Meir that hold that a minor cannot have ייבום because maybe she, when she grew up, she will turn to be Ailoni. Rabbi Eliezer is not concerned about it. So it means, how do you tell me that the reason that Rabbi Eliezer prohibited the Kohen to marry a minor, it's because he is concerned that maybe she will turn to be Ailonit. Ucha de Rabbi Yehuda misavar la ve'atanya zona. Now we're going to understand the word. What does that mean? So you see here several views. One, zona kishma divrei Rabbi Eliezer. So Rashi explained to us that it's like to'ah, someone who get lost, someone who's like wandering in a jungle, doesn't know what, doesn't go in a clear direction. In general, the idea is, according to this Rashi, it's a married woman that have relation with other men. That's one avenue to understand the word zona. Rabbi Akiva Omer zona zo mufkeret. Not necessarily married woman. It's applied to any type of woman. Can be single, can be married, as long as she have relation with every man, or not every, but many men, more than one time. The Chazon Ish elaborate in Even HaEzer 15, and he said in a definition of that view of Rabbi Akiva, it means someone, I don't know if it's the right word, but it's like harlot in the modern days, or prostitute. Yeah. So someone have relation, can be single, can be married, have relation with many men. That it means. Rabbi Matya ben Charash אומר, אפילו הלך בעלה להשקותה ובא עליה בדרך הסעה זונה. So here you have a husband and wife. He suspected her. He is traveling to Yerushalayim to have this ritual of water. And on the way, while she is now prohibited to him, because she is sefeksota, right? Now they have relation. So that's already make chayavei lavi. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, zona zu ailonit. So that's different view. Just the one who cannot have children. The Chazon Ish explained that that's a matter of category of capability of having children. וחכמים אין זונה אלא גיורת ומשוחררת, which means someone have בעליה גוי או בעליה עבד, שפחה כנענית שבעליה עבד, for example, ושנבעלה בעילת זנות. So Rashi said, לה פסולה כגון אחת מכל העריות וכגון בת ישראל לנתין ולממזר. And that's basically the problem that Tosfot have in Amud Aleph with that sense. So Rabbi Elazar Omer, פנוי, הבעל הפנויה, שלא לישון משוד עשה הזונה. Said it's basic. If you go by definition, it said even of an unmarried man who has intercourse with unmarried a woman, meaning they are both single, but not of the purpose of marriage, so he caused her to become a zona. So Tosfot Yeshanim said that's applied to yoter mibi'ah achat, which means more than one time. Rabbi Eliezer, one time, as long as shelo l'shem mishut, asa'ah zona. So the Gemara said, lo, which means, according to the Braita, Rabbi Eliezer, which is the first view, disputed Rabbi Yehuda, which is the fourth view, and he hold that Ailonit, not considering zona. So Elamarava Dabarava Hacha beKohen Gadol Askinan, which means when Rabbi Eliezer said that Kohen should not marry a youth, meaning a minor, he speaks exclusively to the high priest, and he said, Le'imat kaneila, when a person can acquire a minor, he applies not at the time that they betrothed or married, but only, it's like breira, right? Uvar lemafrea. It's a preconditional, set up. Lechi gadla beulai. When the marriage of the minor is not in effect, only when she grew and she is capable to have children, then beulai. And then Kohen Gadol cannot marry beula. So in that sense, if Kohen Gadol married a minor, he will, when she grew up, he will be in violation of beula. So that's including mefutat atzmo, anusat atzmo, etc. So Amar Rabba rejected that, and he said, mechalei lev. Mechalei lev, it's no meaning. What are you talking about? Idekadesha avua, if the father of that child betrothed her, mehishata ukanala. So it's a retroactive act from that very, since the Gemara in Kiddushin, page 3b, tells us that the father can betroth his daughter. So since at that time she was betula, so that make her marriage totally in effect. Like in every manner of betula, marry Kohen Gadol, and she can stay with him for the rest of the life. Ve'ide kadsha nafsha ha-Rabbi Eliezer hi velo Rabbanan. So, meaning, according to every view, Kohen Gadol cannot marry a minor in that situation. So, because everyone agrees that when she grew up, then he will be in violation of be'ula. אלא אמריו על העולם בכהן אדיוט, חיישינן שמא תתפתה עליו. You talk about a regular Kohen, and the idea is, we are concerned that you give her a little candy, you give her a little something, right? And you turn her astray. Why? Because young minor doesn't know how to behave properly, and easily you can seduce her to do something, right? So therefore, the rabbis put the rules that you cannot marry a minor. So the Gemara asks, Ki ache Israel nami. So why it's specifically in Kohen? You can say that Israel too, a regular fellow, cannot marry a minor. So they said, Pituyei ktana onesu. That's considering some matter of honest, which is some type of rape, that because she's not capable to comprehend what she's doing, right? The honest Yisrael mishra shari, which is if you have a married woman that was raped, as we said several times, and the husband is a regular Israel, is not a Kohen, so she allowed to stay in that marriage. So basically, here she's not barat da'at, she doesn't have the level of comprehension, and if you think about it, it's a minor, lo pirakta et habayit, you didn't destroy the family by doing so. Versus if you're dealing with a Kohen, you're basically making the house to fall apart.
But she don't have, like with a Kohen wife, if somebody have to rape her, she don't have the fault that she was forced.
Yeah. We're not talking about at this very case about act of raping per se.
Well, they're talking about a minor, right? So I mean, they're talking about the same statutory rape here.
Yeah, but
it's considered a form of rape with a minor.
You mean to say that you give her the candy or something?
Right, yeah. Basically, if you seduce a minor here, if you're an adult and you seduce a minor, depending on the age of what it is and what state, it's rape. It's called rape. It's called statutory rape. Statutory rape, which means basically by law it's rape.
Yeah.
Okay. It means by law, and that's basically the same thing that they're saying here.
Rav Papa אמר, בכהן גדול, והי תנאו דתניא, betula. The Torah said in Leviticus 21 verse 14, Yachol ktana, maybe he can marry a minor. Talmud lomar isha, meaning grown woman. I isha yachol bogeret, which means in a sense it's already advanced in that level of bagrut, meaning she passed the age of 16, 17 of the youth. Talmud lomar betula hakritzad, יצאה מכלל קטנות לכלל ברות לא באתה. The third view, רב נחמן בר יצחק אמר, הייתה נאו דתניא, בתולה אין בתולה אלא נערה, וכן הוא אומר, והנערה טובת מראה מאוד, בתולה. So that's the meeting between Rebecca and Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, we read several weeks ago. So according to the views, most of the views say that she was 12. Rashi is a famous Rashi in Bereshit 25 that said that she was 3. But anyway, Tosfot said that this disputation between different midrashim. The key is that she was very young, regardless. Say 12, say 3, etc. רבי אלעזר אומר, פנוי הבעל פנויה לשלום של מישות, הסעה זונה, אמר עמרם, אין הלכה כרבי אלעזר. Now the Mishnah. The Mishnah, the previous one, already alluded indirectly the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply. Now the Mishnah tells us a very important rule. Lo yibatel, Tosfot Yom Tov said, yibatel, Adam, mipirya urviya, a man in particular, alright, may not negate the mitzvah of to be fruitful and multiply, אלא אם כן יש לו בנים. Only if he already has children. בית שמאי אומרים, שני זכרים. He needs to have 2 sons. ובית הלל אומרים, זכר ונקבה, 1 son, 1 daughter, שנאמר, they said in Genesis chapter 5 verse 2, זכר ונקבה, Bra'am, male and female, Almighty created them. So it's a very big disputation among the rabbis if this statement it's an addition or it's a separate statement of disputation. The big question is, it's by the way a halachic question. What exactly involved here? Does that mean Zachar u'nekeva? So Rashba said, he says, for example, if you have, how the world survive? He says, you can have one man and many women, but the world cannot survive without women. The basic need of the world is a woman, right? So therefore, fruitful and multiply. So that's applied to both male and female. It's the mitzvah. So the idea is, the whole purpose of God creation, as we said earlier, is to occupy the world. And occupying the world is by being fruitful and multiply. Hai yesh lo banim, but you have children, mipriya uviya batel, miisha lo batel. So it means even you have a children, he is now fulfilled the mitzvah of fruitful and multiply. But still, he still have to be married. You hear, Elliot? That's for you. מסייע לרב נחמן אמר שמואל, דאמר, אף על פי שיש לו לאדם כמה בנים, even a person have several children, אסור לו לעמוד בלי אישה, he should not live without women. שנאמר, they said in Genesis chapter 2 verse 18, לא טוב היות האדם לבדו. They said it's not good for a man should be alone. So either the Rambam in his wisdom in Ilchot Ishut chapter 15 tells us that it's because he have all kind of wrong thoughts if he's by himself, or the Ramban basically asked, is that biblical, is that rabbinic, the idea of marriage. Some said it's implication from the Torah. You see the story of Miriam. the sister of Moses, she turned and she have a leprosy because she talk a lashon hara. So what's lashon hara? They said that he have 2 sons and then he separate himself from his wife, etc. Ve'ika de'amrei hayesh lo banim. If you have children, batil mi pirya uviya batil name mi isha. He is a free man even for marriage. Name tehevet yuvta de Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. That he said that he still, even you have children, you still have to stay married. So they said, lo, ein lo banim, nose isha bat banim. Yesh lo banim, nose isha delav bat banim. If you have no children, he need to marry a woman, so they will have a children together. Yeah. But if it's already have his own children, so he can marry a woman that doesn't have potential to have children, as long as he's not staying alone. So, nafka mina. So what do we derive from that? This is something to the extreme. They said, limkor sefer Torah bishvil banim. Someone who cannot afford to get married, so he can sell sefer Torah. But he said, if he have already children, he cannot do that. So the idea is, the Gemara in Tractate Megillah, page 27, tells us that you don't sell Torah only if you need to study, building a yeshiva, or married, and you cannot afford. That's a different story, but it's a very serious machloket rishonim, a disputation among the early sages. Tosfot mentioned that, especially in page 62b, and it's also the Rosh, the Mukhe Yosef, and much more. What happened with the second marriage is a person should strive for the second marriage to take someone who can have more children, or it's not necessarily. So Tosfot tells us here, if you look here, they said the very last Tosfot. דאמר בדיה, אין לו בנים נושא אישה בת בנים, יש לו בנים נושא אישה דלאו בת בנים. If you have no children, so you should marry a woman that they have children together. But if you have children, so he can marry a woman that cannot have children. ועוד אמרי, דמת אומר, אפילו יש לו בנים בעולם, מצווה לישא בת בנים. אלא מדוע איך צריך למכור ספר תורה בשביל בת בנים, כיוון שיש לו בת בנים, לא למכור מאחר שמוציא שאינה בת בנים ולא יצטרך למכור. So, לכתחילה עושה, בית שמאי אומרים, 2 זכרים. בית שמאי said, the obligation is 2 baby boys, 2 children, 2 sons. מה התאמה לבית שמאי? אלפינן ממשה. דכתיב, because they said in the book of Chronicles, chapter 23, verse 15, Bnei Moshe, the sons of Moses, Gershom ve'Eliezer, which means, you see here, a name of 2 sons. Not everyone agree with that. The Zaruch Laner and others said that many times in the Torah there are daughters, the Torah just don't mention them, either because they're not part of the context or other reasons. But here, we know that after they have 2 sons, before receiving the Torah, Moses separated himself from his wife. The difference is that the others who separate themselves from their wives return to the wives after they're receiving the Torah, while Moses didn't do it. The Tosfot said they're not really divorced, they just live separate from each other.
Rabbi,
yes.
In Gershon and Eliezer, was they Kohanim? Because Moses... Obviously,
but
they don't mention them.
Because you have to remember the narrative. The narrative speaks about the lineage of Aaron. But just let finish. There is a midrash that said about Miriam, that when Amram divorced his wife, we all know the story, the famous midrash, that it was a persecution and all the baby boys were commanded by Pharaoh to put in the river. And as a result, Amram, the father of Miriam at that time, divorced his wife, Yocheved, and then Miriam came to her father and she says, you are worse than Pharaoh. Pharaoh put a decree against baby boys, and you basically creating an atmosphere that everyone divorced their wife because they follow you, and therefore they will not have neither boys, not even the girls. And then he returned back to his wife, the mother of Miriam, which is Yocheved, and he married her. And then they have the sons, Moses and Aaron, because as you know, Miriam was the oldest one. So here you see one state, but later on you see when she talked against her brother, that's a different story, because the brother already have 2 sons, so that's considering Lashon Hara, and therefore she received Tzarat.
Boyachem leshuloim malachai yeshuloim malachai